Alto to this occasion and all of our following forums as well, I'd like to reintroduce who the Southgate Women's Group is. We are sponsoring this series for the candidates for Palo Alto City Council. The Southgate Women's Group started as a small social gathering with only one thing in common. We all had a dog. Now we share much more than a dog park that we met in. We're sharing life in a pandemic and a life in a very new political season that is enveloping us right here in our city of Palo Alto. To meet with care, and due to the pandemic in our midst, we've turned to these Zoom meetings. To deal with the political season, we've decided to sponsor this educational series of forums so that we and all our neighbors in Palo Alto who wish to join us can now be introduced to the candidates for vacant seats on the Palo Alto City Council. This is the second of those forums. Let's get started. May I introduce our moderator for the forums, Jeanette Kiesling.
Welcome, everybody. I see there are 16 participants right now. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're from all over Palo Alto. Welcome especially Cari Templeton. Thank you very much for taking the time tonight to be with us and hopefully to tell us all about your plans to be a city councilwoman. Before we get started, let me just very briefly introduce you, Kerry. I will hand it over to you and you can fill this in with more detail, obviously. You've been living in Palo Alto for 15 years, and I guess that makes you a native or local. You have been on the City Planning and Transportation Committee since 2018, and you are its current chair, from what I understand, which is particularly interesting to us here in Southgate because we're all interested in the Churchill Crossing, and I'm sure we're going to get to that in a minute. You have been a delegate to the California Democratic Party, and you are on the board of its Progressive Caucus. Of course, we would like to hear, if you have a moment, what you think about the vice president candidate that was just announced yesterday, or the day before yesterday, actually. So if we have time, it would be nice to see or hear what you have to say on that. You have been working at Google for over a decade, and you left Google in 2017 to finish your master's degree at Stanford. You can also tell us a little bit about that. We're interested in what your background is, your qualifications, and yeah, let me hand it over to you now to see what it is that gets you in this crazy time to be running for city council. What do you hope to change in Palo Alto? What is it that are your topics that you are pursuing? Let us hear it.
All right. Yes, it is a wild time to be running. Thank you so much, Freda and Jeanette, and all of you who have been able to make it to this meeting tonight. Gosh, to start with what I want to accomplish. Well, I'm running for city council to make the promise of Palo Alto available to everyone in our community. And I'm going to tell you a little story about how I got there and hopefully answer some of the questions about my background. So my husband and I came to Palo Alto in 2005 to follow his career at Sun Microsystems. We moved here from Regensburg, Germany. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. And we chose Palo Alto because of the schools, the canopy, University Avenue, and the promise of being part of the dream. We bought a house, a cute cottage over in Ventura. That's near Fry's. And it was a little outside of our price range, but we were happy to get into Palo Alto. And it wasn't easy trying to make it in Palo Alto. We were the lucky ones. We had 2 incomes and no kids at the time. But in our neighborhood, we saw many stories play out around us with different families facing struggles that you don't see advertised in the real estate flyers. So 15 years later, we have 2 kids in the public schools. I have a 10-year career at Google behind me and a graduate degree from Stanford in, of all things, fairy tales, specifically some that that were discovered in the basement of City Hall in Regensburg, where we lived in Germany. My thesis centered around the juxtaposition of the beautiful and carefully curated world of the Brothers Grimm against the living, breathing folk tales that were passed down through oral tradition. The Grimm stories were tailored for the elite and painted golden pictures of life, and the folk tales were much less polished and told stories of tragedy and resilience, loss and growth, struggles and triumphs. So naturally, I was very interested in all of the drama of the folk tales. So since then, I keep going back to this concept. The golden dream of Palo Alto isn't attainable to most of the people who live and work here. Like the fairy tales, there's two versions of Palo Alto. There's the Palo Alto that is a leafy, idyllic college town nestled between San Francisco and San Jose that offers safe streets and top-rated schools. And then there's the Palo Alto that has allowed systemic racism to remain. There's the Palo Alto that makes space for entrepreneurs, but not for city staffers, teachers, essential workers who work here but can't live here, much less buy a home here. There's the Palo Alto that is the dream that many of us still hold on to, but only a privileged few actually live. And there's the Palo Alto where the rest of our residents are living a very different reality. As I attended the Black Lives Matter protest in King Plaza in June, I listened to voices of Palo Alto experience that broke my heart. More recently, many of our neighbors were cheering as racist statues were pulled down from Virginia to Coit Tower, but we have been silent and still when it comes to toppling racist statutes here in our city. So the story of Palo Alto is not a fairy tale. It's real life, and we are the magic that makes it work. We can do better, and we must do better. Let's bring together the best of both versions of Palo Alto. We can have the beauty and charm and the educational opportunities of Palo Alto alongside justice and dignity for all of our residents. We can have our abundant single-family homes alongside homes of students, young families, seniors, teachers, and tech workers. For our Palo Alto story to be great, and for us to deliver that promise to our kids and our grandkids, we need to keep the city alive. We need to shape it and cultivate it and allow it to thrive. Shaping the city through planning and zoning is one of the skills I have acquired in my time on the Planning and Transportation Commission. Land use policy will be important to the council's work ahead. We also need a sustainable transportation plan that will allow our city to combat climate change and traffic at the same time. And we need to take concrete steps to achieve better representation for traditionally underrepresented groups in our community, including ensuring that our panels, boards, and commissions are diverse and representative of the community. I left the tech world and entered public service in 2017 because I felt I needed to make a difference. I have the background and the leadership skills to help our city deal with the issues it's facing. As a career project manager, I know how to get people who passionately disagree with each other to come to the table to reach a common goal. And I also understand that our solutions must be win-win or no deal. We won't sacrifice the good of one part of the community for the other. As leaders, we have a moral imperative to address the barriers to opportunity for all our residents. We need to make the promise of Palo Alto available to everyone who lives here. It's hard work to re-examine our systems and practices and redesign them to work better for everyone, but that's our job. So to close, I offer hope for change, starting with a quote from the first line of the first story in Grimm's fairy tales, The Frog King. The story starts, "Once upon a time when wishes still came true." I really love that part. But our story doesn't start with wishing. Wishing won't work, but voting does. So I'm here to introduce you to my campaign and ask for your vote for City Council this November, or maybe October. I think they're coming in the mail. We can't do this alone, but together we can move mountains. So let's deliver on the promise of Palo Alto together. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. That was a really good introduction to who you are and what you wish to accomplish. So we can jump right into the questions, and I want to encourage everyone to send me your questions via the chat function. So we have everyone muted, and we're going to keep it that way during the meeting. Please go to the chat function in the very bottom of your screen and send me your questions. Of course, I have a ton of questions myself, so you and I can talk if there are no questions coming in for sure. But there is actually one, and that one is coming from Abby Bradsky. And she would like to know how you feel about opening up Foothill Park.
Great question, Abby. Thank you. I am for it. I believe that Foothill Park is, I think it is beautiful and very special. And I have an anecdote I'd like to share with you about it. So every New Year's Day, another family and my family go out to Foothills Park together, and we hike and we think about the new year, and we play. The kids love to play on the trails, and there's a part we go past where these trees are arching over, and it looks like the buttresses of a cathedral. It's absolutely beautiful, and they're all covered in moss. And we talk about nature, we talk about conservation, we talk about the future and our dreams for what the new year can bring. And we do this with a sense of community and sharing and nurturing the relationships between our families and the environment. And whenever I think about Foothills Park, that's what I think about. I think about how the joy for me is not only taking care of the land, but also sharing it with someone else. So I'm not concerned that if we open it up, it will be overrun. I do think there are people who have been to Foothills Camp and want to return and have those memories of growing up here. Maybe they don't live here. I think there are people who work here and want to go take a hike midday, but they don't live in Palo Alto, and it's not always convenient to arrange an escort. So these are all reasons that I'm comfortable opening it up. You know, for the protection purposes, I think it's very important that we do maintain our set number of people allowed in during the day. And I think that's at 1,000. You know, and it wouldn't matter if it was someone from Palo Alto or another city. I don't think we hit that quota very often. It's been extremely rare over the course of the lifetime of the park. So I think it would be safe to reopen, and we might find young people getting inspired to take up conservation from their experience in this beautiful place.
Can I just sort of going to this point, now that the city is having issues with the budget, and obviously Foothill Park is on the city's budget, how would you then finance Foothills Park?
Yes, I think that the finance situation, it has been of our own creation. By the plan that the city council has proposed costs a lot more than simply not checking IDs. So I think we could save money by opening up. The maintenance costs of the facilities there are long-standing neglect in terms of how that site has been funded in the past. And yes, we would definitely want to make those improvements, and these are a good opportunity to make those improvements, especially during COVID when people are accessing foothills to get open space and exercise. So those I believe that those improvements are an independent need, separate from whether we let people in who aren't residents.
Okay, well, let's leave it at that with Foothills Park, because other questions are coming in now. But I would like to take the second question that Abby posted, because it is a very good broad question for you. It gives you space to answer to your point. Could you give an example of a specific change you want to make and how specifically you would make that change? So what I guess she means here is that she would like to see you talk about one topic, you know, that you would like to change as soon as you are elected.
Absolutely. Another great question. One of the things I'd like to do that I think would be very quick and easy to implement and is very specific is to change how we do our appointments to boards and commissions and panels in the city. Right now, we have an interview process, and in some cases, like the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, we had kind of categories of people, and in some cases we don't. So for example, did you work in the area? Do you live in the area? Those kinds of things. But I've noticed that we don't have a consistently diverse boards and panels and commissions. And in some cases, we're really lucky and we have perspectives of all types, people of all backgrounds, and in some cases, we can do better. So one of the things that we can do specifically is, have you ever taken a test at the university and have to sign the honor code right before? This is a behavioral economics learning that if you are reminded of your goals right before you make a decision, you're more likely to adhere to those goals when making the decision. So if you sign the honor code right before taking an exam, you're more likely to follow the honor code. So I was thinking that it would be really nice if we could have some diversity reminders that we review on the City Council before making appointments to our boards and commissions and panels. So those would be relevant to whatever the board and commission and panel is about. So for example, I started out on the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, and when I got on the Planning Commission, I had to leave, but I follow it and I go to their meetings, and we went to the public meeting to see some results of their work that they were sharing, and it was absolutely wonderful. I brought my kids because I was very excited. This is something, we used to live in this neighborhood, and we had a lot of time at the park, right? So I brought them to see what they'd think, and they were the only children there. And I don't know whether I was the only parent that had been involved. I don't think I was, but it got me to thinking, like, how much are we calling that parent voice out during the discussions, and what other groups could we be bringing into that discussion that would enrich the outcome and make it more appealing to a broader set of the community. So that's what I have in mind specifically, is to work together to come up with our list of different kinds of viewpoints and perspectives that we can include when making those appointments. And one more thing specific to you guys is on the, I'm also on the XCAP, which is the Railroad Crossing group. And I have recently added personas to the discussion, so we can discuss not only from a city council perspective and an engineering perspective, but how to each type of user of those railroad crossings, for lack of a better phrase, how would each of those groups feel about the crossing alternatives, such as students who are biking to school, or a small business owner, or a person who lives very close to the railroad tracks. So really trying to incorporate those perspectives and different perspectives into the decision-making process throughout the city.
So since you mentioned it, let's move to the railroad crossing issue. I think.
Oh, I stepped in it now, didn't I?
Now look at the chat. That is pretty much what a lot of people would like to know about. So I guess the top question is, what is your position on this, and which of the different options would you support? But let me read some questions that came in on that, just to kind of give you a full understanding of what people want to know. So this one is from Kathy. Would Kerry accept the option of doing nothing at Churchill Avenue? If not, why not? Given the pandemic, remote work, companies deciding employees can work remotely going forward, Caltrain doing its own grade separation study, etc. With Caltrain planning to do its own grade separation study, would it be prudent for XCAP to wait on making any recommendations for grade separations and just pass on the knowledge it has gleaned in the process? Does Kerry favor increased Caltrain service and train frequency? If so, why? Should grade separations divide our city or continue to provide east-west connectivity? How can the XCAP consider making holistic recommendations without including Palo Alto Avenue and its impact, closed or not closed, in the mix? Just for the future, could you just keep your questions a little bit shorter so that Kerry can can remember all of that, but I think you are an expert in this particular field, so I'm sure you heard all these particular questions before. And I would like to just add one more question from Rob Levitsky to the same point. Is it fair to close Churchill, benefiting perhaps 20 homeowners and completely messing up Embarcadero and Oregon Expressway while trying to accommodate the 9,500 cars that were daily crossing the tracks at Churchill? So these are the questions so far on this issue, and I'll just hand it over to you.
I would like to thank you for handing me so many softballs tonight. Okay, all right, these are tough questions. Hi, Rob. You know, let me start in the abstract, and then I will answer what I can. And just fair warning, I'm probably not going to answer some of these because that is the decision-making process I'm involved in. However, as far as traffic goes, there are a few corridors in our city which are in need of serious improvement in terms of flow, wait time, level of service, which I know we're no longer using, but we don't want people to be sitting in their cars, burning fossil fuels, waiting a long time on our roads. We'd like to have the throughput and have the efficiency, right? So I do think in the abstract, there are a number of areas that need urgent improvement, and Embarcadero Road is one of them. We do have a lot of items in front of the Planning Commission and the City Council that pertain to Embarcadero Road. And the good news is we have interest in talking about how to improve those. And one of the things that we can't include in the railroad crossing project, but that is an idea born out of it, was related to improving the Embarcadero Road flow and improving the east-west connectivity there, which is right now a little bit challenging with the dip and the turn right before Stanford and the left turn pockets from Embarcadero into El Camino. There's a lot of improvements we can make there. They may be separate from the railroad project, or portions of that may be included because of if detours are required, for example. So if Churchill was closed, we may have to make improvements on Embarcadero at El Camino and Embarcadero and a couple of other cross streets to accommodate that. Now, regarding my position on the railroad crossing alternatives at Churchill, I am deliberating on that over the next few meetings with the XCAP, and I want to remain a credible contributor to that conversation and not come in pre-decided. I have evaluated them. I have some that are my favorites. I have some that I can live with, and some that I just think are impractical or infeasible. So I can start with the ones that I think are impractical and infeasible. When I joined the XCAP, I was hoping to be able to champion something like the tunnel or something that would eliminate our nuisance from the railroad altogether. I have since learned about how challenging it is for a variety of reasons. Primarily, the environmental impact is unacceptable to have at the tunnel. And that's really unfortunate because theoretically it's the best option for us because it's out of sight, out of mind, right? But we'd have to divert a significant number of creeks. We'd have increased risk of flooding, especially with climate change. We're going to see, you know, we have to really be careful about our flooding risk, and we wouldn't want our tunnel to be flooded, right? So there's a lot more technical reports that we reviewed to support this conclusion, but I just wanted to share that with you, that was one that I was heartbroken to remove from my reasonable list. Yeah, I live down here near Meadow now and use that crossing all the time. And it would be awesome to remove the train from our understanding of how the flow works and have it undergrounded and all those things. But I just don't think it's feasible. There's also the financial aspect of it that is this is an understatement to say it's significantly out of touch with anything that we could possibly come up with for funding. That's not what I wanted to hear. I'm sure many of you don't want to hear that as well. However, I do think that the process that we are embarking on right now is incredibly important, and I encourage you to speak up. I see some people, Terry, Jack, here that have come to our meetings. Now that they're on Zoom, it's really easy to come to the meetings and speak up and share your opinion. You can also write in emails. But I will tell you this group is the most amazing, compassionate, caring, and committed group I have ever been a part of. There is nothing we want more than to come up with a proposal that everybody would like. So we are attempting to do that without sacrificing quality. So there will be occasionally some things that people are frustrated with or wish we could have done another way. But the best way to make sure that your voice is heard is to participate in those meetings through email contributions, dialing in and making comments and things like that. So first, I just want to thank everybody who has been joining us. And second, to encourage everybody else to chime in. This is your time. We are the next 9 weeks or so, 10 weeks, I believe, is when we're making those recommendations. We're whittling them down. And we want to be able to ask, is there anybody on this call from such and such? Is there somebody who can chime in with their feelings about this? And we need to be able to engage with you. And so please continue to come and start coming if you haven't.
So I want to follow up on this with a comment from Terry Law and then another question from Susan Newman. But just for Lenny, I don't quite know when exactly you were taking your decision. Could you inform us about that? When is the XCAP actually coming up with a recommendation?
Yes. So we have a site called Connecting Palo Alto. Let me just pull it up, make sure I have the right. So it's called connectingpaloalto.com.
Okay.
And that's where you can find everything about our agendas and our upcoming schedule. And I'll send it to you as well, Jeanette, if that's helpful, and you can pass it out to your mailing list. But we have a tentative agenda that next week we have off, and then 3 weeks at a time, we're going to evaluate each crossing. And I think we're starting with Churchill. So that's the time. So just check in here, and August 26th is our next meeting.
So let me just then start with a comment by Terry. I live on Churchill, and it's really sad to me that I am being set as being selfish because I don't want a massively busy street in front of me. How do we get to the answer without making us on Churchill out to be bad people? If you lived on Churchill, you would not want it to be any busier than it already is. This whole thing makes me feel like I am being beat up daily. We bought on a busy street, but no way should we live on a crazy busy street. How do we keep neighbors together during these hard decisions? So that's, maybe you want to comment on that first before I go into Susan's.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is probably the most important topic of this city council race, is how do we understand that our neighbors can have different perspectives and different opinions without being evil or without characterizing them in a certain way. And I think that goes, not just from the neighborhood, but it goes all the way up to the dais. This is not how we have to be to each other. And, my campaign is about kindness and about understanding and empathizing with your neighbors, and trying to find ways to move forward together. Because if we can let go of our anger and frustration, then we can move forward together and maybe find a solution that meets both our needs. So that's one of the reasons, going back specifically to the XCAP, that's one of the reasons I wanted to add the personas in there, because I think it's not enough to say, this is the cheapest option, or this one checks the box technically, but we don't know how it affects the different groups. I want to really confront ourselves when we make the decision about who is affected and understand those trade-offs. And it's not to say we won't have trade-offs, Terry. I mean, we're going to have trade-offs. There are going to be people who are frustrated. But Can we hear them? Can we acknowledge them? Can we accommodate, you know, if we do end up having to make trade-offs, can we do something that alleviates the pain that certain members of the community may be feeling? And so this conversation absolutely has to be had, and we're not in a war and we're not taking sides. Everybody has a perspective, and that perspective is valid, and they deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of whether that perspective lines up with yours.
Thank you. Maybe I just want to bring in what Ken Choice wrote on this very issue. At times, the most influential members of the community are those who make the most organized arguments. How should the city council weigh issues to benefit the community at large without being overly swayed by the most vocal individuals? It's kind of going in that direction. So maybe you want to comment on that, and then I jump back into the train issue.
Yes, and as an organizer and an activist myself, I really sympathize with this question, because it does take a tremendous amount of energy to muster up the power to counteract another force, right? And not every issue has a group that can take advantage of those opportunities to participate. Now we're doing a lot better now that we're on Zoom. I will say participation in every public meeting I attend has gone way up. It makes me so happy, because we are seeing more even voices and a balance of perspectives, right? So that level of accessibility to our public meetings is crucial. And I will do everything I can to fight to continue having Zoom be an option even after the pandemic is over. This will have more working voices, more family voices, people who physically can't go to the location of City Hall and speak up. We will hear their voices and we won't be as imbalanced. So that's one aspect of how I want to address it. But we also have to, besides encouraging more public comments from a diverse group of people, we also need to go back to what I was talking about, diversity on our boards and commissions and panels as well. Because if we have a more representative body, we are going to be able to reach out better. Our outreach is not good. It's very lopsided. We are relying on community leaders to do that outreach, and that's great. But people can only really operate inside their sphere, and they can do everything they can to expand their sphere. I know you guys were working on that survey, right? Even that was challenging, and we were trying to, you know, what I hear is that you all were trying to be as even-handed as possible and as inclusive as possible, and it's hard. That is why having a more representative decision-making body is really important. So not, you know, that doesn't solve everything. You only have 7 members of council. How do you take those 7 members and make sure that they are hearing from the representative people? So that's a little bit longer. It's not the low-hanging fruit I was talking about with making our decisions on appointments. It's more longer term, where we have a leadership process where we know how we collect the people who are representing different groups, and we make sure that they have been reached out to. And I know that they do that very well on the business side with the chamber. That's what the chamber does, right? They collect businesses and then they communicate out to their groups. But we should talk to more than the businesses. We want to make sure we're talking to the neighborhood leaders. We want to talk to the faith leaders. We want to talk to leaders who represent communities of, you know, differently abled people, or any other, maybe there's an ethnic identity group that has formed and wants to get more involved. Whatever that is, we need to, as a city, commit to reaching out to those groups proactively when decisions are coming up that are going to affect those. So similarly, what we do in planning is when a project is going to come near you, you get a postcard from the city, right? Hey, there's something coming up that may affect you. Let's see if we can do that along other dimensions than merely your address.
Great. Let me just add to this point a note from Kathy. She would like to know, is Kerry saying that she would suggest quotas of some type to attain diversity on city panels and commissions?
It's a great question. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. No, I'm not talking about quotas, but I think I'll give you an example with the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan. Ventura, for those of you not familiar with it, has our densest Black population in Palo Alto. And that panel was appointed with, I don't know, 12 or 14 people on it, and not one Black member was in the original appointment list. To me, that's the kind of thing that if we had a list in front of us, did we think about, does this affect this group, this group, this group? Would it affect our decisions? And fortunately for the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, when I left to go to the PTC, there was a waiting list of applicants, and Lakiba from Ventura was appointed, and we did get to hear her voice. And that was a really important change from my perspective. But she could have been appointed first. Like, she could have been there. That's I was a potentially on the fence decision, and she was on the wait list and somebody else was appointed. So I think those kind of things would change if we were reminded about what communities are affected by decision-making bodies and how to increase the diversity of the discussion. But you don't need a quota to do that. You need to just be reminded, okay, here's the makeup of this, and here's why this community is unique. And are we hearing from the voices that represent that community? And that can also be a public discussion. It may not always need to be, just the council involved. That might be an opportunity for us to say, well, here's what we think is unique about this project, and here's the voices we'd like to see. It could be community driven, but I don't think quotas is the right answer, especially the way that Palo Alto's demographics work out. Then that may not even be productive. That may not provide the diversity we want.
Great, thank you. So let's go back to the train issue. I have one question. We're going to close it after that. From Susan, like I said, do you think the mitigations for Embarcadero should be done independently of closing Churchill? What do you think the effects of mitigating Embarcadero would be on one of the other alternative grade separation approaches? And to add on, Terry Locke would like to know, have we thought or added speed bumps or other ways to slow traffic on Churchill if the decision is not to close the crossing? And let me just add my own question to this. That is a question that came around a little bit earlier. Has the situation with COVID-19 impacted any of these talks? Because as it was pointed out earlier, the traffic has decreased significantly. And the question is, will it ever go back to where it was? And do we have the right plans on the table right now? Are we sort of basing what we're looking at on the right numbers?
Okay, let me start with Embarcadero. I'm not saying that the specific Embarcadero suggestions from the XCAP needs to be implemented. Something needs to be done. Embarcadero is a hot mess, and we need to make it safer. We do have low speeds there, which is nice, but I do think that there are times when it's really backed up, and we can do better. So there's a whole bunch of different tools in the toolkit of the transportation team that they could propose, and that would make flow better and smoother, safer, shorter, all those things. I'm not a transportation expert, and that's not my school background, but I do think we have a lot of smart, talented people ready to solve problems on our transportation team, and we as a city need to prioritize that. Additionally, regarding COVID and transportation, we have had some commenters in public comment ask about the effect of COVID on this project, whether it should be shut down. We've also gone longer than we planned to go because of COVID. We've also lost members because it's gone on too long and people are dealing with their own stuff right now. So there have been COVID-related challenges to the project. However, we discussed it as a team and with the public, and our decision has been capture our recommendations with the knowledge we've gathered so far so that we don't lose that knowledge or don't feel like we have wasted the research that we've done. So we're going to capture it, and that's what's going to happen in the recommendations. Now, whether those recommendations become implemented or adopted by the council or any of that, your guess is as good as mine. COVID may affect that, but we are committed. As I said, this group is the most committed I've ever worked with. We are committed to getting that knowledge captured so that all the work you have put in to sharing your perspectives with us is captured, so that all the expenditures on reports, traffic studies, etc., is captured. So we're doing this. We're doing this for you. We're doing this for everyone in the city because we love you, because we want to have a good outcome that reflects the community's input, and the community's best interest. I don't know what to say about whether Caltrain is going to run more or fewer trains, whether traffic and commuting is going to go back to the pre-COVID state. I don't know. I do think that the work if it does go back, then the work we're doing is incredibly significant towards making that experience of having a train running so often much better for our community. That is our goal. Our goal is to make it better. We want to have fewer lives lost. We want to have the best safety, the best traffic flow, and really the best outcome for Palo Alto. That's what we're trying to do. And so if you do, I'll pitch it one more time. If you do have concerns, please let us know. We're doing our best to accommodate and understand the perspectives that people have.
I'm sure we'll hear more on that issue, especially in the neighborhood that is heavily discussed.
Definitely. And you're welcome to call me, by the way. I just want to say my phone number is on my website. It's Kerry for Council. Call me, email me, set up a meeting, whatever. I'm available to discuss this.
I would like to jump to two more issues before we run out of time. And one, again, was posted by Susan Newman. Palo Alto has a very loop-sided job to housing ratio. I believe it's actually 3-to-1. What do you see as the issues with this imbalance? If you see it as a problem, what would you propose we do about it? And let me just add another question that came in through the chat function, but to me directly. I just want to know if Kerry says she's pro-housing, while during her approximately 1 year on the Planning Commission, she approved every single office construction product and zero housing, and even approved letting a commercial developer evict 100 households from the President Hotel apartments and convert that building to commercial use. Can you comment on that?
I did no such thing. I was not on the commission at that time. I was not a part of that decision, and that is absolutely false. I'm not aware of approving commercial other than a 7-unit building on El Camino that has since been canceled. But if that's the case, I will own up to every decision I've made on the Planning Commission. Including approving 102 houses last night. So as far as what I mean by pro-housing, people have labeled me that, and I'm starting to like, okay, if that's what I am, it makes it easier to talk about, I guess, and categorize, but I don't think it captures the depth of the conversation. I look at all the people running for council, and we all have a variety of views and perspectives, and I don't think that labeling us one way or the other is very productive. All of us have approved housing at some point. What I can tell you is that I live now in Barron Park, and when I look around me, I love this neighborhood. it's a beautiful neighborhood and very diverse. And there's apartment buildings, there's high-rise apartment buildings, which is pretty unusual, but there's one on the on a Arastradero, which isn't too far from me. There's condos, there's duplexes, there's ADUs, there's everything you could possibly imagine. And it hasn't once detracted from the beauty of the neighborhood at all. It's still one of the most desirable places to live in Palo Alto, excluding your lovely neighborhood. And, you know, so I think that there's a lot of people may be more afraid of those things because they're unaware that they are already coexisting with many of those. So for me, I get excited about these things. I've learned it, I've explored, I've studied it, and I see that it's here, and I see that it hasn't detracted from my joy at living here. In fact, having a smaller home has allowed one of our family friends to stay in the neighborhood because they were able, when they lost their rental, to be able to move into a townhome that they could afford. So that's a perk, right, for our family to have our friends live nearby. That said, I am not like one of my neighbors said. She's like, are you sure you'd be okay with having an apartment building, you know, where my house is? And I thought, you know, no, of course not. Of course not. That's a very different situation. What we do as planners is we help people build things that are appropriate for the city and for the location. So even if a person next door to me wanted to improve their single family home, if they were to make it too large, it wouldn't be approved, right? It has to fit inside of a space that's appropriate for the neighborhood. And that is, believe it or not, a number of different types of homes could be built in that same envelope. We don't even know from the outside. I honestly don't know if somebody has a duplex or if it's a single family home. So I would say that's what I mean by being comfortable with adding homes to Palo Alto, is that we have the ability to be thoughtful about it and not frustrated. We can find ways to build something that fits and that's appropriate and that the neighbors would welcome. And there are places, you know, where some things are totally inappropriate, and there's places that are more flexible.
Great, thank you. So let me now move to a question from Freda. She would like to know, is Kerry in favor of the City of Palo Alto business head tax or another type of tax to assist with funding transportation issues such as grade separations? And maybe, you know, just to add on to this, can you comment on a business tax? Because from what I understand, Palo Alto is the only city that doesn't have a business tax, de facto not taxing the business, but putting that tax burden on all of us instead of the 3-to-1 ratio of businesses to households.
I'm not sure that it's on all of us. I don't think the city is adequately funded. I mean, I don't think it's transferred from the business to us. I think it's just missing. So, you know, am I in favor of having a business tax? I am. I wouldn't be proposing one that I hadn't worked with and done all the practices that I just talked to you about. I would hear from different community members how it would affect their businesses, how it would affect their employees, things like that. And we would create one that the businesses would not oppose. And they did that very effectively in Mountain View with Lenny Siegel, negotiating directly with Google and coming up with something they were ready to accept and get on board with. That's great because it means you don't have to come up with a very expensive campaign to get it passed on the ballot. You can find ways that that would be easier to implement. So that's what I would do. I would be working with all the different members of our community that would be affected and involve them in creating something that we can get going with, because we do need that revenue immediately.
Can you just elaborate on the first part of your answer? You're saying it's not, I didn't quite understand that it's not properly into the budget. What do you mean with that?
Do you mean when, so the first thing I said was regarding the frame of we're paying and the businesses, we're paying the portion the businesses should be paying. I wasn't totally comfortable with that frame, because I don't think that anyone's talking about reducing taxes on individuals in association with any business tax. I haven't heard it that way yet. I believe that the city is underfunded, and so the business tax should be added to get revenues in, and that's a slightly different frame, and it's only just a nuance, but I want to speak to that.
Oh, okay. So it's just relatively speaking. Okay. Fine.
Yes.
Can you comment on? I looked at your website, and you had quite a number of positions and issues, and I recommend everyone who would like to know more about Cari to go to her website, and we'll have it posted at the end of the meeting. Can you comment on your defunding the police suggestion?
Yes, I did not state defunding the police, but I did say that some of the funding that we have for police should be used for other types of public safety, and that we need to think about public safety as more than policing. So what I'd really like to see is, how can we use some of the budget that is overfunded on the policing side, especially the field officer, who are the armed individuals, and acquire for our community the mental health services that we need for some of our first responders. So, one thing, for example, that I was thinking about, we had, I believe this was last year, we had a woman who was highly trained field medic. She recognized the signs of a stroke in herself, and she was losing her ability to speech. So she went outside and asked for help, and she ran into a young man who was a minor and asked him to call 911. And he didn't know what was going on. She wasn't able to communicate. And the dispatcher asked some questions like, well, do you think she's on drugs? Do you think she's dangerous? And he didn't know how to answer, because he's a young person and he doesn't have that experience, and he's not a medically trained person. So what happened is, they had dispatched the emergency services, which were there within minutes, but they held them to have an armed police officer go and check out the situation before the medical treatment was provided. And that added 20 minutes of wait time to a stroke victim. As you know, that's extremely dangerous. So what I'd like to do is see if we can have a different approach, right? This was not, if we'd had another tool in our tool belt besides an armed police officer that could evaluate the situation, maybe we would have been able to treat her sooner. So that's the kind of funding shift I'm talking about. I do think that if you look at our budget, and this was before COVID, I realize we have cut it since then, but I'm talking about our normal operating budget when it's not COVID time. We're spending, I think it's $45 million on the police force. And if you calculate that out for 66,000 people, it's over $600 a person. Compare this to other nearby communities. Mountain View is also overfunding, but they're still only $500 something. Milpitas, I believe, is under 300. So comparable communities like ours are able to have fewer dollars spent per capita on their police budget and still be safe communities very similar to ours. What can we do if we took some of that budget and took care of people that are having a mental health crisis, took care of people that were having an addiction crisis? And would we have fewer violent interactions with city staff, with our public safety staff, if we were to rethink what it means to provide for the public safety? Public safety is a big deal. We love living here because it's safe. We feel safe here. We want to make sure that everybody feels safe here. And right now, that is not happening. especially for people of color in this community. They are being engaging with our police staff more, even though they're not doing anything differently than the white people in the community. So we heard this personal testimony directly from people who've experienced it at the Human Relations Commission. We heard about it at the Black Lives Matter rally. We do need to think about, you know, what's the better way to keep our community safe, that we don't go down a path that is uncomfortable for us to own up to, right? And that's making people feel uncomfortable unjustly. So that's what I mean. I'm not trying to say defund. I'm definitely not going down that path, but I am saying let's use our funding wisely and address the actual issues we're having. And that includes the mental health crisis that we're having in Palo Alto.
Thank you for that. So we have a few minutes left, and as it is a tradition in our forum, we would like to give you a last word and also the opportunity to tell everyone about your website and where we can donate if we want to support you. So the last 4 minutes are yours to just make your point. If anybody would like to ask a very important question, last question, please send in now. I'm happy to squeeze it in the very last moment. I just got one now. Would you like me to read it, Kerry, or would you like to take the time to just talk about your campaign once a little bit more?
Oh, sure. Go ahead and read it. That's fine. I'm here for you.
What are your ideas for addressing the crisis of homelessness? And that's from Susan. And from Kathy, does Kerry feel that the homeless should be permitted to sleep on the street or in city parks or library grounds, public gardens, and so forth?
Well, let me start with this. What a shame that we live in such a privileged and economically wealthy community overall, and we still have a homeless problem here. I do think that that is something that makes me very sad. And I understand that some of these are transitioning between homes and don't know where to go. It is hard to find places to live here. I understand some people are longer term unhoused, but I do think we can do something about it. Now, as far as you know, whether we use our parks and library space and open space, public space for people to live in, that is a conversation to have with those community members first and hear what they think would help. Sometimes people have very strong opinions about that, about like where we put them, for example. We don't want to put people, we want to find solutions together. So as far as services, I do think we do need to have public facilities for people, public restrooms, possibly public showers. The most important part about homelessness is, you know, sanitary concerns, so that we don't have outbreaks of disease in our community. I have seen that, for example, in San Diego. They did not have any facilities for their homeless individuals, and they had a massive outbreak that last time I was there, they're spraying down the sidewalks to disinfect them. And this was before COVID, right? We don't want things to get to that level here. We do need to find humane ways to take care of all of our residents. We do have a smaller homeless population than others, and we are very lucky in that way that people can find, but there are still a few that do need extra services. And so we need to provide social services for those folks and help them get in a safe, sanitary situation that is appropriate for their financial situation. And we have some services in the county that we can take advantage of. We just need to be a little bit more proactive about it. Oh, Jeanette, you're muted. Oh, I should go on?
I said I had some network issues, so I'm not sure if you answered that question. Can you comment on specifically on El Camino, on the vehicles that are parked there?
Yes, I am concerned about sanitary issues there as well. I do think we need to figure out how to have public hookups or have a place that vehicle dwellers can remain for over 24 hours in order to keep the public safe from any kind of health issues resulting from dumping of gray water or black water, right? Like, we need to be safe first and foremost. Places, you know, they're doing some good stuff in Mountain View we could take a look at and see if we have similar locations that would be supportive of hosting RVs and for more than overnight to provide some stability, but that would require some negotiations. And again, you know, all of these things tied together, everything we've talked about ties together. Those relationships we're talking about making with our business community, maybe part of the negotiations would include offering space for this, right? Offering to fund a hookup for the RVs. So all of this stuff ties together. We are one community and we can solve problems together. The best way to do it, I think, is to treat each other with respect and understand that sometimes the saying about getting more flies with honey than with vinegar is pertinent in city politics too, right? There are things that we want to improve our community and people we need to help us do that. Let's find ways to bring everybody together to solve these problems.
I think that is a perfect last statement to end this meeting. And to thank you very much, Cari. And as like you said, do you want to give us your webpage again? Just
yes, absolutely.
Find more information.
So I'm cariforcouncil.com, CARIFOR council.com. And my contact information's there, my priorities are there. I would love to hear from any of you. If you wanted to dig in deeper on a subject, we can have a meeting. If you want to get involved in our campaign, we love volunteers. We have a great volunteer program. We're reaching out to seniors and checking in on them and seeing how they're doing during COVID time and listening to their concerns. So if you want to be part of that outreach program, we would love to have you. And yeah, so I'm accessible and available. I encourage you to come to XCAP meetings. I encourage you to check me out on the website. And I'm so grateful for all of you for organizing and participating in this forum, because I haven't met all of you and I would love to. And thank you, Jeanette, and thank you, Freda, for arranging this and leading this program, because there's nothing more important than voting, and knowing what you're voting on starts with programs like this. So I really appreciate everybody's time.